Is Australia a great place to live right now? 9 in 10 of us say yes. Will it be a great place to live in 10 years? Only 5 in 10 will say yes to that. Cost of living, taxes, travel time, housing, immigration, these are the top 5 aspects of Australian life expected to decline over the next decade. All of this contained in the NAB's latest Special Insights report. Yeah, on the flip side though, hopes are high when it comes to entertainment, telcos and public transport. So, are Australians right to be worried? For tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Professor Richard Miles, Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney, and Alex Vikovich, editor of yourmoney.com.au. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Yeah, it's a good question. 9 out of 10 say that this is a great country to live right now. Only 5 out of 10 expect that to be the case in 10 years. Alex, what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, firstly, I'd say, typical journo, I'm always very sceptical about these kinds of surveys and didn't see a lot around sample size, and particularly when it comes from a bank who, at the moment, is particularly interested to kind of, push forward some distractions. Putting all that to one side, I'm not really surprised about this. And indeed, on the first point, I'm quite comforted that 9 in 10 Australians do think that this is a lucky and good place to live, because I think on most metrics it is. Poverty is historically, or at least not historically, but relatively low compared to the rest of the world. People have, relatively good access to ability to live healthy and prosperous lives. So, I do think that it's important that we keep that kind of relative luckiness in check, and I think I would be disappointed if we didn't. And I think also that, the increasing number of Australians travelling abroad and travelling abroad for long times might be helpful in that regard. Having said that, on the second point, this whole idea of the kind of, being scared about the future, I think that's tapping into a few things. Firstly, I think perhaps the survey respondents here are being influenced by just the kind of culture of negativity that's coming out in our politics. One of the really interesting points there that came out in the survey was people didn't feel that there was a shared vision for the future, and I think that's, symptomatic partly of what's going on in Canberra. When you're changing Prime Ministers all the time.
Who could look at them and say there was anything scary of a shared and great vision.
And people are uninspired. You compare that to the Keating years and the Hawke years and even the early Howard years. People kind of knew where we were going. So that's part of it, and I think social media and indeed the traditional media have a role to play in that negativity as well. But more substantively in there, it does tap into some anxieties that are going on. There's a little bit in there that sounds kind of Trumpian. There are some fears around immigration. There's fears around focusing on the big cities and not the regions. So really interesting that this could be a sign of this kind of populism.
Yes, I agree, because there was one that said 73% of people, 73% of people want more products made in Australia, even if we had to pay higher prices. Yet one of the things they're worried about is the rising cost of living. But anyway, so that's quite doesn't really fit together.
Make America great again.
Totally, make Australia great again. Bring back the jobs to Australia, even if we have to pay more. What did you think of it all?
I thought 2 things. One is it shows we have a complete lack of vision at the moment. Look, if you look at our sort of broader political culture, I mean, we haven't got any vision for next year, let alone for 10 years' time. The thing that really made me laugh, I have to say, was what people were optimistic about, which was telecommunications, which is obviously, I'll have a better iPhone.
Yes.
And the other thing was, transport. Oh, just imagine how cushy, the Ubers are going to be. Or,
I'm not sure where these people live.
Entertainment.
Well, if we're depressed, at least we'll be entertained by
exactly.
something.
So this whole it didn't seem very weighty to me. Right?
No, so I totally agree.
Public transport's going to be better. Travel time's going to be way, way worse. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't all shake hands with each other. But yeah, the whole thing is, we're dreaming so small when it comes to 10 years in the future and how our lives are going to be better. Thinking back what we had 10 years ago, the iPhone was barely coming out.
I suppose the big question is this: do you think Australians are good at imagining the future? Right?
Yeah, I wonder
about that.
I wonder if these surveys often, people are good at judging the here and now. I think you're right. As much as we whinge and complain and we don't trust anyone anymore, and everyone's got to win back our trust, and we're all depressed because we're on Facebook too much. As you say, in the end, I think it's encouraging that 9 out of 10 can say, you know what, we're actually in the best place in the world.
Absolutely, and if people are as anxious as this suggests, maybe Clive Palmer's chances are a bit better than some are saying in that next election.
With those weird advertisements that come on.
That's right. The fear of losing what you've got, which is great, is a powerful thing, right?
Yeah, look, and there's a deep psychology in that. I don't think it's unusual that if you survey people who are likely, these are people that NAB has got access to, which means they're probably not below the poverty line. They may be, but they're probably hanging out on NAB trade or in places where they can provide provide this data, to be frank. So it's not unusual that people who are probably in a good position and have time to fill this out are happy with their lives now. And it's a deeply human thing to be worried about the future and okay about the present.
Yeah, I wonder if it always shows that we're worried about the future. You kind of should be worried about the future, right?
That's what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, that is human nature. Now, millionaires are becoming more discreet about their money than previous generations. This is according to high net worth intelligence firm WealthX, which basically looks at the habits of those with a net worth between $1 and $30 million. The movie montage-style shopping spree, that's apparently been replaced with constant clicking. Yeah, online shopping. Immersive and unique experiences, meantime, are more appealing these days than just the standard old Rolex or Lamborghini. Throughout history, do you find that you've noticed with your historical studies, Rich, that these patterns have changed?
Look, generally, this is a bit of a change, actually. The only time when the rich used to be discreet about their wealth was when they thought they're going to get their heads chopped off or a revolution was coming. Then you kind of hid it all and, you know, and whatever else, buried it in the ground. Usually, if you had it, you flaunted it.
Yeah, but you can get your head chopped off by social media these days.
Different kind of head chopping. You have a court of public
maybe reasons to be discreet. Because you do get those undercover millionaires walking around in T-shirts. They need to be flashy.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's a Silicon Valley thing. You know, I think it's partly that conscious capitalism. A lot of millionaires now are a different breed to millionaires in the 80s or 90s, and so they naturally, you know, care more about bicycles, that is, than they do about Ferraris. I think that's part of it. Even in China, I mean, this WealthX report identified that there's, you know, hugely growing high net worth individual base in China and in Latin America. In China, you know, for anyone who's been there, sees a lot of Lamborghinis around downtown, you know, Shanghai. But the government actually, interestingly, is now telling these new billionaires to curb it and to kind of, you know, not be seen in public because they don't want this sort of inequality, or at least the optics of inequality, to get out there, because that's not good communism, of course.
I was actually really surprised at this report, because I think that now is the time when people seem to be flashing around the money more than ever because of the social media side of things, right? So I've read stories, we've even reported on stories recently of people who are now renting out private jets that sit on the runway, and you just come in and get your photo taken as if you're someone who rides around in a private jet. Now that's only for social media purposes. It's the same.
But if they were actually very rich, they would own that private jet.
Oh, that's right, and that's an experience thing, right? And this is it's a daily experience that contributes to your wellness and you know, gives your social media followers something to enjoy. I think that's different from the bloke who owns the jet, putting up photos of the jet.
There was a really great article I read a few weeks ago about people getting sick of going to these really beautiful spots all over the world, and there's just loads of people sort of sitting there taking photographs of themselves because they're basically just sort of self-publicising themselves. The Insta moment. Just full of people doing little selfies and stuff.
Or go to a concert and you can hardly see who's on stage, right? It's just a sea of phones. But, you know, I understand that. We have our followers at yourmoney.com.au as well. People do need to feed their followers if they're going to be serious about social media and, you know, indeed turn it into business success and so on. So I say all power to them.
Right. Well, speaking of concerts and social media, megastar couple Jay-Z and Beyoncé are offering fans a chance to win free tickets to their concerts for life if they go vegan for a month. Beyoncé says that she will have a plant-based breakfast and meatless Monday, while Jay-Z has pledged to have 2 plant-based meals a day. Now, you probably noticed from that they're not full vegans, right? This is the weirdest part about this whole story. But first of all, Richard, would you do it to get free tickets for life?
I suspect I'm already following Beyonce's diet.
Unwittingly. Diversified diet, right?
I did think that 2 plant-based meals a day he's going to have, and I'm thinking, well, I'd probably eat a banana and an apple at some point in the day.
Exactly. So we're in.
I don't think the hardcore vegans would be too impressed by it. But, you know, in Beyonce's defence, she is from Houston, and anyone who's spent time in the great state of Texas knows that it would be extremely difficult to maintain any kind of vegetarianism, let alone veganism. I have friends, in fact, who are vegans and live in Houston, and they eat at the ashram, the local Hindu ashram, most of the time, because there's nowhere else to eat, and that's where they go and get a nutritious meat-free meal. So, you know, considering that, and considering that, you know, if you're billionaires and you own your own companies and you live in New York City, then, you know, there's ample steakhouses at your disposal that I think they should take advantage of. So I don't blame them.
Yeah. 2 meals. He might be having 8 meals a day. Who knows? You know.
But I just love that they weren't willing to necessarily give up for a month.
But you know what? It's part of the point. I think I think this is a pretty interesting point, because they're obviously not willing to go full vegan, but their whole point is we should cut down on the amount of meat we're consuming, the amount of animals that we have as part of our food. You know, it just does really bad things for the environment. So they're just talking about cutting down.
Yeah.
But it's weird then that they're saying that if you go vegan for a month, we'll give you maybe...
No, but I think there is a serious point to this, which is I think this is an appropriate and positive way of incentivising the sort of cultural change you want to see. I think this is a lot better than, for example, taxes on meat or sort of, you know, putting in place rigid structures by which people can, you know, not choose what they eat. I think if Jay-Z and Beyoncé, who, you know, don't run listed companies, Rockaware is a huge company, Jay-Z's clothing brand, but he owns it himself with a few other rappers, I think. And if he wants to, you know, take on these sorts of causes, I think free tickets is a great way to do it.
And also, they are being realistic, right? I mean, that's one of the things. You look at American diet, you know, this is realistic. This is something that could actually happen. So in some respects, even though we're, you know, making loads of jokes about this, it's probably the right way to go.
And going back to actually to the last point as well, when you kind of read through the story that we've kind of all read thinking about tonight, it was interesting. One of the commentators was saying that the way that wealthy people evaluate a brand in terms of, well, what mission does this brand represent? If I'm buying this, does this contribute to the greater good? If I purchase this product, you know, what does it say about me and my values? And this is kind of the same thing, right? Like, they're just pop stars who are doing concerts, but again, it's trying to have that brand for themselves of like, what do I stand for? How does that influence, you know, my sphere and how people view me?
It's no different from the Google
for?
execs that ride the bike. It's conscious capitalism.
Yeah, it's kind of that extra layer that they've got to add to their own brand to kind of remain relevant and popular, really, I reckon.
Yeah, although I think they're probably getting some backlash from the hardcore vegan, you know, sections of the Twitter sphere.
You always going to get backlash from them.
Yeah, that's right, me in particular.
Yeah, well, I suppose...
You vegan?
No, far from it. No. You obviously don't follow me on Instagram.
Sounds like you spend too much time in Houston, I reckon.
That's right.
Probably wrapped up with
Never too much time.
Yeah. Speaking historically, rich and powerful people wielding their influence for matters like this is probably a pretty new idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, altruism.
Good?
I don't know. No, if you think about some of these, even those sort of much maligned Victorian factory owners and people like that, they often set up free schools, free meals, etc. Now, people could say that they were sort of exploiting all these people for that to actually happen. But no, I mean, if you look in the 19th century, there's lots of this kind of stuff going on.
Lots of vegans too, but not by choice most of the time.
Exactly, just starving, you know.
Final question, would you want to be at a Beyoncé concert, every single concert for the rest of your life, or would that just be punishment?
That would be one of my circles of hell, I
Yeah, that's exactly right.
No, you can taste much.
No, it's Beyoncé.
Oh, I'm giving up me immediately.
It's Beyoncé.
Yeah, no, I think I'd implement some of the spending tips that I learn on this show. I would save up and buy a ticket to go see him and keep eating meat personally. But I'm, you know.
But yeah, you have to check the Instagram feed for more details, obviously, apparently, which I'll have to go and do after the show. Thank you both for joining us, Richard and Alex. Thank you, guys.